So where to next? Now you have worked for a while. You've worked through, you've lived through this body. You've experienced certain phenomenology, experiences of your body. You experience what Edgar Tolle speaks about, the pain body from time to time. And maybe you want to reflect on that as well. But as this all happened, you now discover, with the learning behind you of traumatology, you also now discover John with his incredible way to articulate what family constellation is all about. And at this point, you decide to go for the training.
Again, it was about a year after that first introduction that a big life event happened. My mother was murdered. And so we have another interesting family constellation happening. So my mother was murdered, and at that time, my husband decided that he would work out of the country. And it was a time where obviously I needed to do more to find out where to next, because my life had come into an absolute drastic change. And for me, it was almost like, this is now the time for you to train for this work.
But that was dramatic. So mom was murdered. Was that back in Joburg, or was it?
No, she was living in Namibia at the time, and it came just a year after my father passed. So there was a lot of that. From a family constellation point of view, it is quite interesting, because my grandmother was murdered when I was 4 years old. So for me, there is, what's all this in my family system?
Unbelievable. Yeah.
So these are big concepts in family constellations. Where do we start? Why is there this repetition? And where does it start? So yes, at the time that my mother passed, my husband was not around. I took the time to actually do a 2-year training with John. And obviously by that time, I was so much into the work that I felt that this was a good way forward with my own life.
Right. And then some other training followed as well, which you and I then became part of, I believe. The South African Systemic Constellations training.
Yes.
Anything that stands out for you as a highlight that you want to reflect on during the time of training?
I think there is so much in terms of, we had different trainers with different aspects, and I'm really grateful to have done the training with the facilitators that came out from Germany and brought different perspectives into the training. It does make me a little bit of a maverick in this work, in terms of understanding that there is so much in this work. So although we started with family constellations, it then involved in doing systemic work, working with organizations, working with businesses, and then also working with illnesses. And so for me, it was, what is there that we can't put into the field with the constellations. And for me, it actually changed my concept of what is consciousness. So at that time, when I started this work, it was all about maybe a spiritual journey. But for me, I did not want to have a spiritual journey as another religion. For me, it was, I couldn't have the following of an idea or an ideology just to replace a religion. So for me, it is about the concept of what is consciousness and how does consciousness fit into our world. So that's for me actually the big expansion in this work.
Right. So you mentioned that your facilitators, John, your training facilitators, and later on the Germans and so on. But something that you and I already have discussed in other contexts is also the teacher of the field, that one of our biggest teachers, we can say, is the field, or the knowing field, or the systemic field. Maybe you want to reflect about that a little bit in terms of your own practical learning.
Okay, so I already started when I said I explored what happens to the baby in the womb. So for me, it is about what is the consciousness. And so when I move into the field, one of the biggest understandings I have is to not have any concept of any idea of judgment when moving into the field. Because the moment we go in with an egoic judgment, it's as if we can't get to the answers that are true. We can't get to the answers that are driven in the pureness of what I want to call the consciousness. So as a facilitator, I needed to learn to become nothing when I move into the field and acknowledge that the wisdom is in the field. So with that, obviously the exploration became never ending, and it still is. And I think that is why I'm finding myself where I am today, that every time I set up a constellation, there is another wow. I haven't tired of the wow effects at this point in time.
One of the Zen teachers that I follow say, beginner's mind every time.
Every time, yes.
Yeah.
And so there is not a question that we cannot explore. However, I want to put a caveat here. We cannot use the field to create a desired outcome. We cannot use the field to create futuristic outcomes that we maybe want, because that wouldn't be fair. So entering the field, I believe that we have to be ethically pure in our intention on what it is that we can gain from the wisdom of the field, and not play with it as such.
So in our conversation around the hero's journey, the symbolism of the sword, the two-edged sword, is used. And for me, it's a beautiful symbolism of discernment.
Yes.
Would you also say that discernment is one of the great tools that we need to learn in this work?
Absolutely. And because the work has been done for so many years already, there are already a lot of good guidelines that we can follow. And there are quite a few theories that are already in place that we can just follow. It doesn't mean that every time we set up and we use a theory that it is true, but we've got quite a lot already that we can work with when we set up a constellation.